Hello and welcome to Traveling with Abdurrashid Abubakar. I am Abdurrashid Abubakar. On the show today, I'm going to be talking about travel and tourism to the continent of Africa. Top 5 tourist destinations in Africa in 2022 based on international arrivals according to Global Data's Travel Demand and Flows database. Number 1, Morocco with 8.7 million arrivals. Number 2, Egypt, 7.9 million arrivals. Number 3, South Africa with 6.8 million arrivals. Number 4, Tunisia with 6.1 million arrivals. And number 5, Zimbabwe with 1.6 million arrivals. This analysis is drawn from Global Data's Travel and Tourism Intelligence Center. On today's show, I have Ms. Kim Poole, an international artist, singer, and world traveler. Welcome, Ms. Kim. How are you today?
All is well. Thank you for having me today, Abdul.
Yeah, thank you for coming to the show today. Can you tell my viewers how was your first impression, visiting Africa?
My very first?
Your very first.
That was 15 years ago.
Yes,
Maybe even more.
Yes, your very first impression traveling to the continent of Africa.
So I'll tell you what my impression was before I went.
Okay.
Right? Growing up in Baltimore, you don't really have a direct experience with African culture. At least I didn't back in the 80s, right? But we did see TV, so we saw commercials, 10 cents a day, just 10 cents a day. Kids, little babies, bellies swollen with hunger, flies flying around in their eyes. And it's not something that you aspired to go and see, and it was almost a deterrent for traveling in Africa. And so for me, my first experience to Africa was the complete contradiction to what I knew as a young person growing up. I'm like, the worst thing you could call somebody when I was little was an African booty scratcher. It's, oh my God, if you wanted to really get them, you say, oh, you ugly, oh, you stupid, oh, you fat. I've always been a big girl, but if you really wanted to get them and make them upset, you would say, oh, you a African booty scratcher. That was the worst insult that you could give to someone. And this, experience growing up as a young girl, it didn't necessarily make me interested in traveling to Africa as an adult. But as an artist, when I started to perform, I put all of my energy into my performance. I did local shows in Baltimore, then that grew into the DC, Maryland, North Carolina. I would even begin to fly up to Canada. And the truth is, my art was more accepted on the continent than it was here. And they began to fly me in for the Ghana Music Week. Nigeria, they had festivals. They would bring me in. And this was not the Africa I knew. My first journey, I was brought by Anthony Browder into Egypt. Actually, you said that was one of the top tourist destinations,
yes.
But I wasn't there to be a tourist. This was during the Arab Spring, and they shut down all of the excavation teams, the Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt. They shut down all the excavation sites, and the only excavation team that was there was the American University with Dr. Alina Piszczykova and Anthony Browder in South Asasif. And so that's around Luxor, right?
Luxor, yeah.
Yeah, so we were there, and they told me that I could perform to build the esteem. And everyone asked me, they said, Kim, you're going to build the esteem and to celebrate with the archaeologists, or who? Why are you going to Egypt? They just said a man set himself on fire, and he's protesting. And I said, listen, this is my first trip to Egypt. I don't care what he's over there doing. It's all paid for, and I'm going. And then Egypt was very different than the Africa I saw on TV as a child because it was Arabic. And I said, oh, so Africa is different in this way. I thought I would go to see black people. And so in the South, I realized the Nubian presence was different from those in Cairo. Just so many lessons early on about the different kinds of people in Africa. And I think we forget that Africa is a continent.
Right.
There's so many languages, so many different types of people. It's not just Ghana and Nigeria or the people you meet here maybe in Baltimore because they've decided to move here to the U.S. Most of the people in Africa, they stay. And so when I went to Egypt in 2012, that was my first time going. And since then, wow, it's been an incredible journey across the continent.
Yeah. So you have been to the Gambia where you meet with President Adama Barrow, and you have been to Ghana, you've been to Nigeria, you've been to Kenya, and you love Kenya to the point where you adopt a school in Kenya that you train them and you teach them. Can you tell us more about your involvement with the schools in Kenya?
Sure. So the Teaching Artists Institute, our organization is developed to connect artists and art culture.
What organization?
Teaching Artists Institute.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were developed in 2015, just 3 years after I started going to Africa myself as a performer. I realized it was bigger than music, and I wanted to be a part of art as a concept, innovation, creativity, art as an idea in design thinking. And I realized that even though Africa was rich and they were flying me in to do these shows and we stayed at nice fancy hotels and stayed in nice cars, the road that we drove on was unpaved in some areas. That on the sides of the street, little kids were selling plantains. And I said, there's a big gap in resources here. Yes, you have the super rich, but then you also have the super poor. Now, I'm super poor, make no mistake about it. But in the U.S., you don't feel it the same. We all have roads. Even in the worst hood in Baltimore City, we all have running water. You may not have lights all the time, but the infrastructure is there for you to have electricity. And so I started the organization because I realized that art was just a medium. It was just a tool to help us develop a better world, especially in Africa, because Africa is the resource bowl for the world. So it's not just Kenya. You asked about Kenya. We work in 8 countries, 6 of which are on the continent. And Kenya is the newest out of the regions where we work. So on the West Coast, we're in Ghana, Liberia, Gambia. On the East Coast, we're in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. And so Kenya, this last November, we did our Artisan Conference, connecting artists and art culture to sustainable development. And Kenya invited us. We only go where we're invited. And so we now have an MOU with the Nandi County government. Their governor is like the leader of all the governors in Kenya. And they invited us. We sat in his home. They said, listen, your motto, culture is the new currency. We need that in Nandi County. The Great Valley Rift is an incredible place, the cradle of civilization. And if they can see the value of culture as a tool to mobilize our young people, to empower our women, to facilitate trade and barter, then it means they're ready to realign our community's upward trajectory. And so we want to be involved, and we're bringing Kenya here. Actually, we have the Minister Scola, the Ministry of Youth, Education, Arts, Culture. She's coming on our civil rights tour. So a part of us getting to know each other means learning each other's history, right? And so we want them to learn about Black history too. As a Black woman, I go to Kenya, or like you mentioned, the Gambia. We work with the Office of the President. In Ghana, the ones that cut my teeth started bringing me over, making me feel good about my art. But in Kenya, they're saying, we want to know about your story too. You're coming over here for investment opportunities. You're coming over here bringing tourism and trade. But who are you? And to me, that is fertile ground. That means our relationships are really going to last long term. So
talking about that path that Kenya government or Kenya people want to learn about your culture. So what are your thoughts on Black History Month in America? Because this month is the celebration of Black History Month in America. So what are your thoughts on Black history?
Black history to me is incredible. I am reminded in Black history of all the steps we've had to take just to have a seat at the table. they say that, black people are lazy. They have these narratives about us having access to opportunities and just not taking advantage of them, especially people that come here as migrants. They're like, oh, look at the black people. Just won't take advantage of all these opportunities that I have. Look at me. Look at what I've done. I came here, I got a business, and I got a business loan, and now my family's doing good. I send my kids to the best colleges because I made myself from nothing. I pulled up from my bootstraps, not realizing that those boots and those straps were given to you by the efforts of black people that have been in this country since we were brought against our will, human trafficked on that boat. We've been fighting to make sure that they are allowing Africans and Indians and even the Chinese, when they were brought to build the railroads in California, we were the ones making sure that we advocated for all of these civil rights that allowed them this upward mobility and human rights so that you are recognized as a human being first and foremost. And so now that we're tired, we're like, oh my God, how long will we fight? Now they're saying, oh, look at you, lazy. My people are exhausted because we've made sure that every other community have access to the wealth that is America. And so I think about Black History Month. Started with just 2 weeks. It was just first Black History Day. Then it was Black History 2 weeks, Black History Week. And then eventually it was a month. James Weldon Johnson, I think about all the people, Carter G. Wilson, that have been a part of the acknowledgement. We have to have global observation days. Black History Month is for us every day. Black History every day.
The interesting thing is that the African Union, the bigger umbrella that represents all the African countries on the continent, actually acknowledge the Black History Month.
As they should. Through Agenda 2063, they have aspirations for the Africa we want, and they include the diaspora. They call us the sixth region.
Right.
And as a part of their aspirations, they talk about our identity and our connected heritage. The problem is now implementation. Right? We talk about what we want. They're great ideas, but how do we really integrate the diaspora? First and foremost, we have you. You chose to come here, and we have me, somebody that for many generations didn't choose to come here. Which diaspora are they talking about? Are we connected? Are we having the same issues?
Yeah, so in the 2012 summit in South Africa, which happens in South Africa, that is the Global African Diaspora Summit by the African Union. They have it well defined. I mean, the people that migrate from Africa to here and the people that are already here. They call it African descent. Okay, so they have it well defined. So the implementation is now going to be confusing.
Well, when you go into Nigeria, what you do is you pull out your Nigerian passport. Right? As soon as you get to the border, you may have a U.S. passport when you get to
Actually, that is not true.
Oh? Well, maybe not you, but many of my brothers and sisters.
Some of us actually get visas to go to Nigeria.
But some of them don't, because they don't want the logistical headache. But for me, I don't have that choice. When I go, I need a visa for every country. Should that be the case, as we look for Agenda 2063?
That is why the Sierra Leone president launched efforts to give African descent Sierra Leonean passport that give them the access that you are talking about.
Absolutely. So we applaud Sierra Leone and Liberia. Of course, the diaspora, that is our history. We helped to settle these regions when we migrated there to Liberia. And, they say Ethiopia was the only country in Africa that wasn't colonized, but that's also the case in Liberia. Now, granted, we brought our own baggage and we did a lot of damage in Liberia with the locals that were already there when we showed up. But the Liberian experience is the Black American experience too. And the same with Sierra Leone. We stopped in Sierra Leone first before we went to Liberia. It was a little rough over there. So at the end of the day, the UK Black diaspora, they still now have their own ethnic group acknowledged in Sierra Leone today. And you're right about the president saying that if you can geographically map your DNA to Sierra Leone, we will give you citizenship.
Right.
In Liberia, they have the Negro Clause. If you, in their constitution today, if you are of African descent, you can get citizenship in Liberia. But we're talking about not only the implementation, but everybody else. Because we came from Angola, you know, when the Portuguese were raping people from there. And we also came from Benin and Ouida when they were raping people from there. And in Nigeria, we came from Badagry when they were raping people from there. And even in South Africa, the lie of 1452?
Yes.
They were taking people from there. So all of these regions, the Congo, all of these regions have enslavement trade history. Even on the East Coast, when we look at the Arab nations, they don't get off either. We can go all the way back to Bagamoyo in Tanzania, where the 7th century demonstrates the Arab slave trade using Zanzibar as
Right.
their outpost
Yes.
going into the Middle East. And so
Or Oman.
yes, the Middle East, Oman, Yemen, all of these places were enslaving African people. And so if we're living in the diaspora, we should not have to get the same process for visa as somebody that's, you know, from Europe, of European descent. And a step further, because I'm trying to do not just this revolution, but this incremental change, start with visas, but at the end of the day, eventually passports for all African countries, a borderless Africa. We should get a passport to Africa, because I feel just as much at home in Ghana as I do in Nigeria or Tanzania. That's why the Pan-African experience is so important, because all of the tribalism and the divisions, the fighting in Cameroon, fighting at war with each other because they're not English enough or French enough. We want to look at the Francophone legal system as opposed to the English legal system. So we're going to fight about which legal system is best for us, which African system is best for you. And so the Pan-Africans living in the diaspora and their children, because your kids here will be just as black as I am, just as Akata, make no mistake about it, they will benefit from a borderless Africa. They will feel connected to all of the continent, and that it needs to be the leadership. That's the vein we need to walk into for the future. We can no longer acknowledge when we travel the geographical boundaries of colonial powers. We need to create systems that facilitate the future of Africa. And that means using a diaspora, Pan-African lens on the continent and its resources and the movement of its people. I remember being trapped in the Nigerian airport from Gambia into Liberia.
Okay.
But I had a layover in Nigeria. So I thought, oh, let me extend my layover so that I can go into Nigeria, meet my friends, you know, eat some of that suya I love so much. Listen, I was stuck in the airport for 2 days in a lounge, paying expensive lounge fees. They would not give me a visa on arrival. And I said, if I was a Nigerian, I would easily take out my passport and say, okay, let me in. I wouldn't need a visa on arrival. But for those of us in the diaspora, we don't have that option.
So what was their reason for not giving you a visa on arrival?
They said they just stopped that program a month ago. They said last month, no more visa on arrival if you're coming from U.S. And they said, please, do you have a Liberian passport? Do you have almost the people in customs wanted to help me? They like, this poor lady is stuck in the airport until her connection flight to Liberia continues. And they said, is there any way that we can get her out? We had friends, big people. You know, I know big people in Nigeria. Nigeria is really the Mecca for black people, the most populated African place in the world outside of Brazil. And I said to myself, if there's any way I can get out of here, I'll pay you. I understand corruption in Nigeria. Let me just pay. They wouldn't let me pay. I don't believe it. I couldn't believe that they wouldn't take the money. I didn't have that problem in Ghana. Ghana now does visa on arrival. That's why they had so much success with the year of return in 2019. They love taking my money, black women here in the U.S. We gave them millions of dollars with their tourism, and they still don't give us free visa, which they should. But we gave them all kinds of money in 2019 for the year of return.
Well, you know, what would you say to anyone, you know, Americans who wants to visit Africa?
My recommendation for travel to Africa is not for all Americans, as you just asked me. It's for black people, African Americans? Can we get a piece of the Africa we lost before we open it up to everybody, everywhere? I understand that all life comes from Africa. Africa is the cradle of civilization, and it's the last frontier, not just the first, but it's the biggest resource. Coltan and your cell phone comes from Africa. The rubber in your tire is from Liberia, and it goes on and on. The chocolate in Hershey's chocolate bar, cocoa, cacao, Ghana. So it's not that I don't think everybody needs Africa. All people need Africa because that's where the world comes from. All civilization, all life. But now in modern history, as we create new history, I want Black people to travel to Africa so that they can see what they're missing, because the world is already there. Europe is already there. Everywhere is in Africa, except for the Black people that was stolen and taken away and put in the diaspora that still believe that there's no place for them back at their own home. And they do feel like there's no place because they don't speak the language, because they are not familiar with where they come from geographically. But today, I just thank you for this opportunity and platform so that I can tell them now, Africa is yours too. You have a family in Africa, and organizations like the Teaching Artists Institute and our travel company, Thai Tours, we're making sure that there are safe spaces for you to come back to. So you're not out there just searching on your own. You don't have to be this lone ranger, finding Africa. Not for everybody. Maybe some people want to stay here. There's now this movement to say we aren't from Africa. Slave trade was a lie. We're indigenous. Maybe you were. They came before Columbus. There were already sailors coming to Africa to do trade before the transatlantic. Mm-hmm. You have the Moors that traveled out of Spain, pharaohs, not pharaohs, what do they call? Emperors. Yes, they came. They were already in South America with the Olmecs, and we go back far. We knew how to navigate these waterways. I'm talking about people that came against their will. If ever you want a connection with the continent again, please contact us. And maybe you don't want to make it so deep, right? Maybe you're not in search of your identity. Maybe you're not looking to connect. Maybe you just want a good time. Listen, you get paid in dollars. And if you ever want to feel like your dollar is going to make benefit, do investments in Africa before it's too late, because there's a window right now where the dollar is worth a little bit more. Your money will go further. In this country, you'll never be able to catch up financially. You were brought here as stock. You were the first stock on Wall Street. But the money that you now have made here in the U.S., invest it somewhere where you can leave a legacy to your children. Guess what? It's not here. If you start out with $300,000, you're not going to catch up to the Rockefellers. You're just not. To the Ford, to all the founding fathers of this stolen nation. You're not going to. But there are little places in the Gambia where I can show you how to take $20,000 and start a sustainable business that one day your children will benefit from. So even if it's not about finding your identity, maybe it's about investment for your future. Maybe it's not about investment. Maybe you just want to let your hair down and you just want to travel. How many times are we going to go to Vegas? How many times are we going to go to the Bahamas? Really, when you first leave?
How many times are we going to go to Puerto Rico?
Yes. I mean, when you first get a chance to travel, Paris has a really good marketing campaign. The Eiffel Tower, and forget all that. Kilimanjaro is the tower you want to see. The tallest mountain in Africa, Zanzibar. Now that's a beach. So I think Africa is definitely...
The Serengeti.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Right.
Masai Mara. It's things you only think on TV. It's real. And Africa is accessible now. Maybe not easily, visa problems, passport problems, but that's why you contact us. We can help you with all that. Don't worry.
Because you are with the presidents. Thank you so much, Ms. Kim Poole, for the wonderful conversation. I'll continue to explore more with you on this show, Traveling with Abdurrashid Abubakar. Until next time when we meet again, my name is Abdurrashid Abubakar. Peace out.